I still remember this story clearly. It always comes back whenever I think about playing hide and seek in the dark, or when I walk past an alley at night. It happened one fall, early October, when my 3 siblings and I went to visit our mom at her apartment. I've got a sister named Jess and 2 brothers, Mike and Eli. Our parents had divorced 2 years earlier, so these visits meant a lot to us. Mom lived in a rough part of town. Her apartment was small and cozy, right next to a long, dark alley that led into the complex. It wasn't the safest area, but we didn't care. We were just happy to see her. Her place was warm, filled with random decorations and soft furniture that reminded me of my grandma's house. Downstairs lived 2 kids, Zach and Chi-Chi, our friends whenever we visited. Zach and I usually played tag or kickball in the parking lot beside the alley. But that night, he had another idea. It was October, almost Halloween. The perfect time to do something spooky, he suggested, hide and seek outside at night. Of course, we all agreed. By 9 p.m. it was already dark. That cool fall air hanging still around us. Just 6 kids, 1 quiet parking lot, and a long empty alley waiting for the game to begin. At 9 o'clock sharp, we all slipped out of our rooms and met outside, just like we planned. The air was cool, the lampposts glowed a rusty orange, and the shadows between the buildings looked darker than usual. We stood in a circle and played our usual bubblegum in a dish to pick the seeker. Zach lost, so he was it, and everyone took off running. My sister Jess grabbed my arm and said we should hide together. We always did. We ran toward the back of the apartment building near the big garbage bins. The only way there was through the long alley behind the complex. It was dim, with 1 flickering light at the end, but it felt like the perfect hiding spot. Zach shouted, "Ready or not," and the game began. At first it was exciting, but soon the silence crept in. The air was still, and I started to get restless. I whispered, maybe we hid too well. Jess laughed softly and said maybe we should just quit before it got too late. We stepped out from behind the bins, and that's when I froze. At the far end of the alley stood someone. They were tall, unnaturally tall, the kind of tall that didn't make sense. The light above them cast their face in shadow, and then I saw it. The hair. It was a big, round, colorful afro, a clown wig. My stomach dropped. The figure just stood there, completely still, staring straight at us. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. Jess grabbed my hand and whispered that we needed to go. We turned and started walking quickly back toward the others, my heart racing the whole way. We found my brother Mike and our friend Chi-Chi near the parking lot. Mike looked confused. He thought we were still hiding. Jess told him what we saw, and I pointed down the alley. The clown was still there, only now it was closer. It had moved. Slowly. And it was waving. That's when we saw its face. Not white makeup like a normal clown, but black, like its entire face had been painted to hide its features. The only thing visible were its eyes, wide and gleaming in the light. Then Chi-Chi screamed. We turned around and she pointed behind us. Another clown, this one taller, with green hair and long legs, standing at the other end of the alley. Both of them were watching us. No one said a word, we just ran. Chi-Chi bolted toward her apartment, Mike followed, and Jess and I ran upstairs to ours. When we got inside, our little brother Eli was already there with Mom. She pulled us in, panicked, and Eli started explaining before we could. He'd been hiding near the courtyard bushes when he heard footsteps. Thinking it was Zach, he crouched lower. But the figure that walked by wasn't him. It stopped right in front of him, and when Zach suddenly called his name from the other side of the courtyard, Eli realized something was wrong. Then Zach found him and said, "Got you!" But when Eli turned around again, a clown was standing right behind them, staring down at him. They ran to Zach's apartment and told his parents immediately. When Mom heard everything, she just hugged us all and said she was glad we were safe. I thought it was over. But later that night, I woke up thirsty. Everyone else was asleep. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. I went to get a bottle of water, and that's when I heard it, a light tapping sound coming from the window. At first, I thought it was a branch, but then I remembered. We lived on the 2nd floor. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to ignore it, but curiosity won. I slowly lifted the blinds, and that's when I saw it. The clown, the same one from the alley, standing right outside the window. Its black painted face was pressed close to the glass, and those eyes, wide, pale, and unblinking, stared straight at me. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind froze. Then I screamed. Mom came running, and when I pulled her to the window like some twisted cliche, the clown was gone. There's empty darkness outside. Mom hugged me tight, whispering that it was okay. The only thing that kept me from breaking down completely was that she believed me. She didn't say it was a dream or a trick of the light, she just said, "You're safe now." But even now, every fall when the nights grow long and the air turns cold, I still think about that knock on the window, and those eyes staring back at me through the glass. Ever since that night, I can't stand playing hide and seek in the dark and alleyways. They still make my skin crawl. I've replayed that moment at the window 1,000 times in my head, wondering how that clown even got up there. Maybe he climbed? Maybe he didn't need to. I don't know. But what I do know is that we were lucky. Nothing worse happened that night. Just fear. Deep, unforgettable fear. That never really left me. Even now, when fall comes around and the nights get longer, I still find myself glancing at the window before I turn off the lights, just to make sure no one's watching. This story happened when I was 11, back in 6th grade. My school sat right across the street from this old, beat-up house that always creeped me out. It looked filthy and forgotten, with peeling paint and broken windows. I never understood how anyone could live there. My friends used to joke about it every day after school, saying it was haunted or that some weird old man lived inside. I told them to stop, that the owner might hear us, but they just laughed and called me a scaredy cat. And honestly, they weren't wrong. I was scared of everything back then. For a while, walking past that house was harmless. But once October rolled around and my friends started staying after school for their clubs, things began to change. That's when everything started going downhill. It all started during the second week of October, the first time I'd walked home from school alone in months. Everything looked normal at first. Same cracked sidewalk, same rows of houses, until I reached that one. The old beat-up house across from my school. I slowed down without meaning to. Something about it felt different that day. When I looked up, I froze. Someone was standing at the window, perfectly still, just watching me. Their face was hidden behind the dirty glass, but I could tell their head followed me as I walked by. My stomach twisted, but I tried to act normal. Nothing happened, so I convinced myself I was just imagining things. But it kept happening. Every single afternoon that week, I'd glance up at that same window, and there they were, still, watching. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, and I didn't want to know. It scared the hell out of me. I told my friends, hoping for comfort, but they just laughed and said maybe someone was pulling an early Halloween prank. I wanted to believe them, so I tried to brush it off and told myself I was just being paranoid. Then, about a week before Halloween, things got worse. That day, the air felt colder, heavier. As I turned the corner near the house, I noticed someone standing outside on the porch. Tall, still, and facing me. My heart dropped. It wasn't just the window anymore. Now, whoever it was had stepped out. I tried to stay calm, kept my eyes forward, and walked faster. But when I was almost past the house, the figure suddenly moved fast. They flew down the steps and started running toward me. I screamed and ran as hard as I could. My backpack bounced against me, slowing me down, and I could hear his footsteps getting louder, closer. He was yelling something, but it didn't make any sense. Just random words, angry and slurred. I didn't dare look back. I turned down the first alley I saw and ducked behind a dumpster, crouching low. The stench was awful, but I didn't care. I could hear his shoes scraping against the pavement. He stopped near the entrance of the alley. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Then I heard him mumbling again. Quiet, like he was talking to himself, and his footsteps started getting closer. He was right there. I could hear his breathing. I pressed my hand over my mouth, terrified that even one sound would give me away. Seconds felt like hours, and then, just as suddenly as he appeared, his footsteps faded. He was running away. I waited, shaking, trying to convince myself it was really over. When I finally stepped out, the street was empty. I sprinted the rest of the way home and slammed the door behind me. My parents freaked out when they saw me crying and gasping for air. I told them everything, every terrifying detail. My dad immediately called the police. 20 minutes later, they showed up and asked me to explain what happened, who chased me, where he came from, and which house he'd been in. I pointed right at the old one across from my school. The next day, the police came back with an update. What they told us made my blood run cold. According to their report, nobody lived there. That house had been vacant for years. No electricity, no water, no furniture, nothing. They said it was probably a homeless man or squatter hiding out there, maybe trying to scare me for fun. But the way they said probably didn't make me feel any better. Even now, I can still see that window in my mind, the figure staring out, completely still, and I keep wondering, if the house was really empty, then who was watching me all those days before? Nothing ever came of it after that. The police never found anyone and the house stayed empty, or at least that's what they said. When I told my friends, even they were silent for once. None of us could really believe it. Since that day, I've never looked at old houses the same way. Every time I walk past one that looks abandoned or broken down, I feel that same chill crawl up my spine. I'm 22 now, but that night still feels fresh, like it just happened yesterday. I grew up in a small rural town in Poland, where Halloween was never really celebrated. Most older people saw it as something evil, though lately some families have started putting pumpkins on their porches, even carving a few into jack-o'-lanterns. Back then, I used to walk my dog Susie every evening. She's big and hates kids and cyclists, so walking her at night was easier. In the fall, darkness came early. By 8 p.m. it felt like midnight. That night was no different. I took my usual path, a short road leading from the village store to the old church. On one side was a forest, on the other, a horse stable. It was always empty and quiet, which I liked. The crisp air, the crunch of leaves, it felt peaceful. But as I neared the end of the road, where the forest met an old stable that once belonged to the parish priest, something about the silence felt off. The stable had been abandoned long before I was born. I was lost in thought when Susie suddenly started barking like she'd gone insane. It was so sudden that it made me jump. I looked around, expecting to see a cyclist or another dog, but the road was completely empty. Then I realized she wasn't barking at the street. Her focus was locked on the stable and the dark trees behind it. The light on that road was dim, almost useless, so I could barely see past the first few rows of trees. But whatever she saw, it had her terrified. She growled, barked, and pulled hard on the leash, stronger than I'd ever felt her. It wasn't normal. Even when bikes passed right by us, she never acted like that. My stomach started to tighten as I peered into the shadows, trying to figure out what she was reacting to. Then I saw it. About 10 or maybe 20 meters away, just behind the priest's old stable, a silhouette. At first, I thought it was a bush or some old farm equipment, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't. It was a man. The way the moonlight reflected off his clothes, I could tell he was wearing something pale, almost glowing against the darkness. My chest went cold. He was kneeling, completely still, back straight, facing our direction. Not hiding, but not standing out either. Just there, watching. That's when I noticed it wasn't regular clothing. He was wearing a white robe. My mind tried to make sense of it. A farmer? A worker? Maybe someone praying? But he wasn't moving. Not even an inch, just locked in that unnatural position. I pulled on Susie's leash, but she refused to move. Her hackles were up, teeth bared, every muscle tense. That was enough for me. I wasn't staying there another second. I grabbed her harness and started walking fast, trying to keep my pace steady so I wouldn't look like I was running. I didn't know if that man saw me or not, but I wasn't going to find out. The church was only a minute away, and I saw a few people standing nearby under the light. For a second I thought about telling them, but what would I even say? That there was a man kneeling in the dark behind an old stable? It sounded insane. So I just kept walking. Every few steps I turned around, expecting to see someone following, but the road behind me stayed empty. Even Susie stopped barking. She just kept her eyes forward, walking quickly like she wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. When I finally reached home, I locked the door and tried to calm down, telling myself it was nothing, maybe a priest, maybe someone praying, maybe my imagination. But that night, I woke up to sirens. Loud, wailing sirens that went on for nearly half an hour. I ran to the window and saw flashing lights in the distance, right where the church and stable were. The next morning, I found out what had happened. Someone had set the priest's stable on fire. People in the village said it was probably some drunk teenagers pulling a stupid prank. But I knew what I saw that night, and it wasn't a group of laughing kids. It was one man, kneeling in the dark, wearing white, watching, and whatever he was doing out there, I don't think it had anything to do with a prank. The person I saw that night looked calm, too calm, like they were waiting for something. So maybe there were more people hiding behind the stable, but I'm glad I didn't see them. What still haunts me is how hours passed between when I saw him and when the fire started. Was he kneeling there the whole time, watching, waiting? I'm just thankful he didn't move toward me, and that Susie didn't pull me closer, because if whoever that was could burn down a building, I don't want to know what else they were capable of. Last October, my friends and I went to a pumpkin patch right after school. The air was cold, the leaves were shades of orange and yellow, and the ground was covered in crisp, fallen leaves. We'd been looking forward to it all week. The place was small but crowded, families laughing, kids running around, and the smell of baked goods drifting from a nearby stand. We grabbed a little wagon and started picking pumpkins, walking between rows that stretched across the field. Everything felt normal until my friend Kevin dared me to grab the biggest pumpkin in the back, the one sitting near the trees at the edge of the patch. I laughed and went for it, but as we walked farther down the narrow path, the noise of the crowd faded. The trees grew thicker, the light dimmer, and the sound of the wind through the leaves started to sound less like rustling and more like whispers. When we finally reached the back of the pumpkin patch, I noticed something strange. Just beyond the pumpkins, near the edge of the trees, stood a figure. At first I thought it was a scarecrow. It had a wide-brimmed hat, its arms stretched out like a cross, and it stood perfectly still. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it looked. It was too thin, too human, and then I saw it. The hat moved, just slightly, like someone breathing underneath it. "Do you guys see that?" I whispered. Kevin turned, squinted for a second, then shrugged. "Probably just a decoration," he said, grinning. But my stomach twisted. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. I bent down, grabbed the biggest pumpkin I could find, and told him we should head back. As we started walking toward the main area, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder. The figure was still there. Or maybe it wasn't. Every time I blinked, it seemed closer, but I couldn't tell if it was actually moving or if my eyes were playing tricks on me. "Stop looking back," Kevin laughed, but I couldn't help it. Something about that thing made my skin crawl. When we reached the end of the row, I turned one last time and it was gone. I let out a small breath of relief, convincing myself it was just a person walking by or some kind of decoration I'd overreacted to. We made our way back toward the stand to pay for our pumpkins. The sun was almost gone now, and the air had that heavy, gray stillness that comes right before dark. The laughter from the families nearby felt far away. As we passed the tree line again, I heard it. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping under weight. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Kevin shook his head. I turned slowly, and my heart stopped. The figure was there again, closer this time, maybe 10 feet behind us. It wasn't holding its arms out anymore. It was just standing, facing us. Kevin noticed me staring and asked what was wrong, but I couldn't get a word out. My throat went dry. The figure tilted its head slightly, like it was studying us. Then, without moving its legs, it started gliding forward. Not walking. Gliding. It didn't make sense. Its feet didn't touch the ground. I grabbed Kevin's arm and whispered, "Run!" We took off toward the stand, the wagon rattling behind us, pumpkins bouncing inside. I could hear leaves crunching behind us, faster, heavier, like something was right on our heels. When we burst into the main area, the noise of laughter and music hit us again. I turned back. The figure had stopped at the edge of the patch, just standing there, half hidden by the shadows, watching. We paid for our pumpkins as fast as we could and ran to the car. I didn't look back again until we were on the road. The patch was fading in the distance, quiet and harmless looking, like nothing had ever happened. On the drive home, I asked Kevin if he'd seen it too. He said no, just the pumpkins, the trees, nothing else. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing that figure, the way it tilted its head, the way it moved like it wasn't even human. I tried to convince myself it was just a Halloween prank, but that was a family pumpkin patch. There were kids everywhere. No one would do something like that. A few days later, I saw a post online. Someone else had reported a strange person at that same pumpkin patch, near the trees, late afternoon, wearing something dark, silent, and still. They said the person didn't move like a normal human. No names, no photos, just a warning. I haven't been back to that pumpkin patch since. And every fall, when the air turns cold and the leaves start to change, I can't look at a row of pumpkins without feeling like something or someone might be watching from the trees. Every October, when the leaves start falling and the air gets cold, I remember that figure. I remember the way it moved, and I remember thinking if it had wanted to, it could have followed us all the way to the car. I still don't fully have an explanation for it. I tell this story to friends, but most think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. And I could still picture it standing behind those trees watching us.